Hello everybody. Oh, our boo-boo has not made an appearance in the last few videos, so I wanted to give him, if I could get him over here. There we go. Baby. Oh, say hi to your adoring fans. Oh well, so sorry. I did try. Anyway, he is, he's doing very well. I know he hasn't been on video recently, but he is just as adorable and loving and sweet and everything as I could possibly ask for. So I actually have his sister over here too. So changing it around, she's joining me over here by the window. So we have a full house today. We also have a slightly different view because Harold is working on our pantry, making it more efficient. He's moving lots of things around and doing all kinds of wonderful organizational stuff. So I'm staying out of his way and letting him do what he needs to do. Trust me. Okay. So yeah, looking very much forward to the final results. Okay, so obviously last week needs no introduction. I got all kinds of comments. I love it. I love it. I love it. Kind of what that does for me as an author is that lets me know where your head's at in the book. So obviously I've been dropping hints about Eugene, or setting that up. We've been dealing with all of the amazing power-ups that Sandy and Jason have been getting. We have all kinds of things, so it just lets me know what you guys have picked up from the book, and that lets me know where I'm at. Have I done a good job of foreshadowing, like all that good stuff? And I'm very, very pleased to say that many of you have zeroed in exactly on how this fight is going to go down, or nobody's gotten the whole picture, but lots of you have gotten lots of pieces of it. So that's incredibly exciting to me. That is just great as an author. It lets me know that I'm doing a good job. You guys are picking it up, and it's doing good. Okay, so obviously we are getting ready to have to smack down this particular chapter. So I'm going to pick up just a tiny bit from last one, and then the show's on the road. So we made our way through the crowd and up to the ring. I saw there was already a faint magical barrier around it. For some reason it gave me pause, so I called my soul creations to me. Hide inside me until we're inside the ring and we've tossed the discs. Then you can go out and get into position. Other than T, I really hadn't had any of my other soul creations inside me before, but I thought it would work, and it did. I gave Sandy one last look, then let go of her hand. That was harder than I thought it would be. For some reason, that simple act made me feel like I was truly on my own now. Win or lose, it was all up to me. I took a deep breath and stepped into the ring. Chapter 28, Working the Plan. I was right about the thin barrier of magic. I felt a tingle of intelligence search me for charms, weapons, or anything else I could use in the match. Once it was satisfied, a blue belt of light settled around my waist. The announcer let the crowd roar for a few moments more, but without the captain and Seafull egging them on, they were already starting to settle down. The ring seemed much bigger now I was inside it. Eugene was in his corner, with Victor and a few of the other mages staying outside the ring. He seemed so far away, which was a good thing. I wanted his arrows to travel as long as possible before they reached me. That gave me more time to react. I closed my eyes and reached out with my magic sight. I could see less than half the ring. I wished I could see more, but it would have to do. Seeing Victor in Eugene's corner reminded me I could have my own support people. I turned around and motioned for Sandy to come up. She quickly mounted the steps and stood on the platform outside of the official ring. So far, so good, I said lightly as I could. The hard part's done already, she joked. That parade was exhausting. For sure, I laughed. Now all I gotta do is throw water on the Wicked Witch of the West over there and we can go home. Eugene was still the swamp green color from where the Grand Matron had marked his whole group. You wouldn't think it mattered, but having him look so different actually helped. This wasn't Eugene, my socially awkward friend. This was Eugene the puppet, who was controlled by a horrible, evil man. Until he somehow became liberated from his oaths, swamp green was the perfect color for him. And now, it's time to flip the discs, the announcer spoke up, and the crowd settled down. Let's have both contestants approach the center. Good luck, Sandy called as I left her and started across the mat. The floor felt good under my feet. I could get some traction on this, and I'd need that for quick dodging. I wasn't sure where I was supposed to stop, but a moment after I started towards the center, the floor lit up with a helpful circle not far from the middle. I stepped inside and faced the announcer. The first flip is for the choice of weapons, he said, showing everyone a disc with a hammer on it. He tossed it in the air and it landed on my color, blue. Did you bring any charmed weapons or natural weapons with you? He asked. I shook my head. Then by default, you have selected the empty-handed option. That means both of you will only fight with your natural, magical, and physical abilities. A giant icon of an empty hand hovered over my head. The second flip is for the choice of ring layout, he said, showing everyone a disc with a square on it. I crossed my fingers and prayed for red. I wanted Eugene to pick, as he would surely go for the open layout. If it came down on my color, everyone would expect me to go for the maze layout. I didn't want to give away my plan yet. I wanted Eugene to feel cocky and confident. The announcer flipped, and the disc showed red. Yes! Oh wait, I was supposed to look dejected. I quickly tried to look disappointed, and I guess it worked because the announcer shot me a sympathetic look before turning to Eugene. What type of ring layout do you choose, oh great arrow shooter? Eugene opened his mouth to say something, but the announcer interrupted him. You know, I hear surprises are all the rage this year. Just think how amazing it would be if you chose a different option. It would be like seeing the sun's rays for the first time. People would praise you for days while you sat in your chaise, fire ablaze in your eyes, all aglaze. You'd think of all the ways you'd win and thought, you know, I'd really wished I'd picked. Eugene just looked at him like he was a bug. Say it with me. Maze. The announcer was trying so hard, and I'm sure he thought he was trying to wheedle the best option out of Eugene, but fortunately it wasn't working. I choose the open layout, Eugene stated clearly. The announcer sighed dramatically, like Eugene had disappointed him so much he could barely stand it. Since the announcer was doing all the work, I just tried to look disappointed too. A big icon of an open square appeared over Eugene's head. Well, you are no fun at all. The announcer sighed again, then turned to address the audience. Normally, we'd flip a third disc, but that option has already been determined. Let the record show this is a grudge match. An icon of two fists smashing into each other appeared over both our heads. Well, guys, that's the end of my part of this charade. He turned to me and gave me a bow. Jason, I truly wish you the best of luck. He turned to Eugene and flipped him the finger. I hope you eat glass and die. He turned and walked out of the ring. He was certainly a colorful character, my analytical side said cheerfully. I rather liked him. I agreed, and yet he was probably getting fired right now. I'm sure announcers can't be that biased in regular matches. A gruff-looking referee walked into the ring and stood in the same spot as the announcer. I had a stray thought where I wondered if he had a circle to stand on too, but I pushed it out of my head. That didn't have any bearing on my match at all, and I needed to be fully present. I would normally say that I expect a good clean match, but we all know that isn't going to happen today. I thought he would sound rough, but instead he had a rich, full voice. I've refereed grudge matches before, and usually the contestants hate each other. My job is just to sit back and let them pound on each other until they get all the anger out of their system. Today, though, is different. I understand that both of you do not loathe each other." He gave me a questioning look. "No," Eugene shook his head, then went back to looking stoic. "Before today, I would have said Eugene was my friend," I spoke up, "but I think his master considers him to be disposable, so he's tasking him with doing his dirty work. To answer your question, no, I don't hate him." "Well, you better start hating him real quick," the referee stated. "I've heard what he is oath-bound to do to you. You better come out fighting hard, and you need to fight like you've never fought before. Nobody thinks you can win this fight, but if you are to survive, you better do some damage and find a way to slow him down." I didn't know what to say to that, so I just nodded in general agreement. "I want to be clear what my job is here. I cannot stop the fight until I feel that one of the contestants is in danger of dying. If you try to tap out, it won't matter. I can't stop the fight. If you verbally surrender and scream bloody murder, I can't stop the fight. If you fall unconscious and your opponent starts kicking you, I can't stop the fight." He looked at me and he paused to let that sink in. "The only way I can stop the fight is if I think your life is in danger." I nodded again. "Now, go to your corners." I turned and headed back over to Sandy, but not before releasing my little creations. "Flashers, bashers, surfers, belchers, you know what to do. My life is in your hands. I know you'll do your best." I felt their acknowledgement, and then they all flew away with Eugene. The plan was now officially in motion. "Ring up," the referee called, and a mage stepped forward and started raising the walls. I felt a moment of panic. This was really it. I reached my corner, nodded to Sandy to let her know I was okay, and then turned around and closed my eyes. I couldn't give in to the fear. I couldn't let the terror creep any further up my spine. What I needed was to visit the alley again. I needed to become a cat fighter. I felt inside and touched my connection with Bermuda. All I got back was a lazy, sleeping stream of nothing. My furry companion was still fast asleep back in my bedroom. I really wished he was here, but I was also glad he wasn't. There was no way they would let him in the ring with me, and Bermuda wouldn't have stood for that. It was best I was here and he was there. I just needed to get in the right mental state, though, so I pushed images of the alley and the moonlit night up the connection until a sleeping mind took over. Suddenly, I was there. It was crystal clear. Cats lined the rooftops and perched on the trash. Their cold eyes gathered the moon's rays and reflected them back to me. I felt the gritty road beneath my paws. My enemy was in front of me. I did not hate him. I did not fear him. He was my enemy, and that was enough. I would destroy him. There was no mercy. There was no revenge. The other cats were here, but they would just bear witness to the battle tonight. I put everything out of my mind except the joy of battle. I would bite him and taste his blood. I would hold him close and rip him with my claws. My enemy would fear me tonight. My enemy would fear me tonight. I opened my eyes and hissed. The walls of the ring were finished. The referee was looking at me to see if I was ready. He looked startled, as well he should. "Are you ready?" he asked. Was I ready? I was ready to run across the ring and rip Eugene's arms off. "The plan," my analytical side hollered frantically. "Stick to the plan." "The plan? Oh shit, the plan." One moment I told the referee and closed my eyes again. I was not a cat. I was a human. I needed to fight like one. Screaming at the top of my lungs and running across the ring would just get me shot up. I'd end up with so many arrows in me I'd look like a pincushion. Behaving like a real alley cat would get me killed. I took a deep breath and let the battle rage go. He was my enemy. I would destroy him. That was all. I stepped into my pigeon stance. That felt good. All the training with Tyler merged with my alley mindset. I opened my eyes and took a quick look around. The crowd was there, but I wasn't intimidated. They were just there to bear witness to the battle tonight. I looked at Eugene. I didn't fear him. Instead, I felt ready. I checked my soul creations. They were in place. Go time. I nodded to the referee. Ready, I said. He turned to Eugene. Ready? Ready, Eugene said calmly. Bite, the referee declared and stepped back. I expected Eugene to spring into action, but instead he just stood there for a moment. He looked at the crowd, then he looked at me. Okay. I guess he wasn't in a hurry. He really didn't have to be. He was pretty sure I didn't have any powers that could hurt him, and he was right, for now. I wasn't trying to raise a shield, so there was no rush on his side to shoot me. Instead, I could just be in the moment and enjoy the biggest stage. Instead, he could just be in the moment and enjoy the biggest stage of his life so far. I felt calm. In a strange way, we were dance partners. I wouldn't step until the music started. I was still, like the waters of a lake in the morning. I wasn't going to ripple until he blew me. I smiled at my thoughts, but it was all on the inside. Eugene summoned his bow. The music was about to start. He summoned an arrow and gave me one last sad look. Then he got his game face on and our dance started. He pulled the bow in one smooth move and shot and missed. I felt the roar of the crowd. Eugene looked surprised. What he couldn't know was that my surfer dude had leapt into action just as his arrow left the bow. He put his board against the head of the arrow and surfed it just like a wave. The pressure had nudged the arrow just a bit. Instead of hitting me dead center, it had missed me by less than an inch. I learned two things from that shot. First, his arrows were fast, like lightning fast, blazing fast. I knew they were quick because I'd already seen him fight, but when they were aimed at me, they took on a whole new level of speed. I wasn't going to be able to rely on my regular sight. By the time it registered the arrow was in motion, it was already here. I was going to have to switch to my magical senses. Instead of magical sight, I needed to use touch. Humans can react much faster to something they're touching rather than something they're seeing. The second thing I learned was just how big and powerful his arrows were compared to my surfers. They were about 3 feet long and brimming with power. I felt the flash of magical heat as it went by. That was great for me, as it meant he was using a lot of power in every shot. It wasn't so good for my surfer. My surfer dude was only an inch high, and all the radiated magic tore at the fabric of his existence. If he hadn't been a soul creation and as detailed as he was, he wouldn't have lasted for even one shot. He would have just disintegrated, and all the magic I put in him would have been lost. It was also a freaking miracle he was able to affect the arrow at all. I'm sure the Force Rune was assisting in that regard. If you just compared their sizes, it was like a hood ornament trying to change the trajectory of a car, or a bird trying to steer a buffalo. Great job, I told my surfer. He gave me a cheerful thumbs up. Maybe try partnering up for the next shot and see how you do. Let's go with 2 dudes for the next arrow and let me know how you feel. He nodded and zoomed off to the other side of the ring. Eugene was still taking his time, which was wonderful, as it gave me a moment to process everything. I was still in position, so I waited for his next shot. I hadn't planned on making him think he'd miss. I had planned on dodging the arrow. The idea was for him to shoot more arrows to try and hit me, not for him to flex his personal arrow-bending power and make sure I got hit. Now he'd missed the first arrow, he was going to make doubly sure he didn't miss again. If he personally directed the arrow, even 2 surfers might not be enough to redirect it. I let my thoughts go. I touched the waiting alley cat and the familiarity of my pigeon stance. I was in calm waters. Let's dance. Eugene formed the arrow, drew the bow, fired the shot, all in one breath. It was a master class in speed and power. Fast as it was, my surfers were faster. I felt them, and I felt the arrow when it reached the edge of my magic senses. This time, I reacted fast enough, and I shifted and blocked. It was a good thing I did, as Eugene was all over that arrow. The surfers pushed it off course, and he pulled it right back on again. My shift was probably enough to cause it to miss, but my slap block made sure of it. The arrow flew harmlessly on by. Red, you good? I asked. This was their first contact with the arrows, and I just wanted to make sure they could handle them. We're better than scrambled eggs on a Sunday morning, he said cheerfully. Don't worry about us. We got this. Dudes, are you good? I asked. That sack of shit cheated. They were both mad. That Jake overgunned us. Sorry, mate. I was afraid of that, I told them. He can direct the arrows a bit, just like you can, so expect some resistance. They were both still muttering as they darted off. Eugene looked thoughtful. Then he fired 3 shots, one after the other, as fast as he could. I was able to block 2. My surfers took care of the 3rd one. I realized he could only direct an arrow if he was giving it his full attention. These rapid-fire arrows had no extra input from him. All that time in the sandy arena back on the beach was really paying off. I was used to blocking attacks, lots of attacks, from lots of opponents. Eugene was firing quickly, but he still had to form his arrows in between shots, so it wasn't like he was machine gun fast. I had enough time to block and refocus before the next one shot. Meanwhile, the crowd was going wild. This total newbie was somehow standing up to the tournament champion. He shouldn't be able to block arrows with his bare hands, but somehow it was happening. Sandy was screaming in joy, and for a moment I felt that excitement too. It threatened to throw me off my game, though. One arrow could ruin me. I could not lose my focus. I felt the alley cat again. Everyone in the crowd was a witness. My enemy was still standing. I would destroy him. Eugene no longer looked thoughtful. Now he looked concerned. I shouldn't have been able to handle 1 arrow, much less 3. Since simple shots weren't doing it, he's going to probably pull out some trick arrows now. Eugene formed an arrow. It was noticeably slower than the ones he'd used so far. He pulled the bow back slowly and gave a long pause. He was hoping to psych me out, but I'd played this game before. We were battle dancing, and I didn't step until my partner stepped with me. Finally, he released the arrow, but this time it was a slow arrow. This has got to be a trick arrow, my analytical side hollered. He's going to follow it up with fast arrows. Be ready. Yes, I'm ready, I replied calmly. The arrow was only feet away, and I was already moving to block it when it suddenly exploded with light. My enemy was trying to use my own light technique against me. If I hadn't been so zen, I'd have been pissed. Flashers were my trick. Stay in your own lane. I wasn't using my regular sight for his arrows anyway, so it didn't really bother me that much. I closed my eyes and just felt. Thinking I was blinded, Eugene started shooting in earnest, and as his speed arrows entered my awareness, I moved like lightning. My fists lashed out to deflect and divert. There were too many, and they were too fast for me to block them all, but my body flowed smoothly from pigeon step to pigeon step, from angle to angle, and some of the arrows just sailed right on by. I don't know how many there were, at least 10, but suddenly they stopped. I opened my eyes and my vision was blown out. I couldn't see. T, I called. On it, he replied. I had faith in T and his grove. I'd have my sight back shortly. I didn't mean to, but on a subconscious level, I relaxed my guard a bit. That was a mistake. Eugene usually had a longer pause between shooting sets of arrows, but this time he'd only pause enough to see me blink and try to clear my eyes. He shot a speed arrow, and 2 surfers jumped on board just like normal. Then about halfway across the ring, the arrow split, then split again, and then again. Suddenly there were over a dozen smaller, needle-sharp arrows headed my way. I'd relaxed, so I was caught completely flat-footed. Fortunately, the surfers had already been nudging the main arrow, so over half of the mini arrows were going to miss me. I threw up my hands in reflex to protect my face and neck, and that stopped a few more. It didn't stop them all, though, and my body was peppered with the remaining arrows. They freaking hurt. I felt like I'd been shot several times with a nail gun. My zen was way off, and that's why I totally missed the next arrow. Eugene was guiding it personally, shooting it down low where I couldn't reach, and it speared me right through my left ankle. I thought being stabbed with nails was bad. This was like a hot poker jammed through my foot. I couldn't help it. I just screamed and fell to the ground. "Shut 'em down," I howled to my creations, and they went to work. My flashers lit 'em up. "Take that, you bastard." I had my arms over my eyes, but the light was so bright I could see through my closed eyes and see the bones in my arms. My flashers are intense. The first of my belchers were ready and they let loose. It was much louder than I remembered. It wasn't lethal or anything, but at this point... Pardon. My bashers held back, waiting for a better moment. I had the feeling from them that the flashers and belchers had already done what was needed. "Intruders!" Penny cried, and then she was there. Athena dressed for battle, eyes blazing with fury. She started with my biggest problem, my ankle, and her spear started shooting out capsules like a railgun. Eugene's fancy arrow didn't stand a chance. In no time at all, she'd cut it in half inside my ankle. Just check that. Okay. "Pull it out," she commanded. The pain was so intense I couldn't think. Fortunately, I didn't have to. I just had to follow her orders. "Now," she commanded again. I grabbed the part sticking out the front and pulled. It came out very easily. I grabbed the back part and pulled. As soon as the arrow was out of me, my ankle started feeling better, like a lot better. I felt the cooling sensation over the path of the arrow. What was that? Now the hostile magic was gone. Leaf green magic was flooding the area. It was my mark of the Lagarelle at work. Seafold had said I'd be more resilient. This must have been what he was talking about. This was awesome. I felt both Penny and T asking for my attention. "What's next?" I asked my copper and zinc warrior. "I'm pushing out the little arrows. You need to sing the matrix back into shape. Be quick about it. This battle is hot." "Agreed. T, what do you have for me?" "Your pain isn't physical, it's magical." That was a magical arrow, not a real one, so it didn't make a real hole. You aren't bleeding or anything like that. There's some burn damage, but your matrix is dense enough it prevented a lot of it. Do what Penny says. You'll feel better, and you need to get on your feet quickly. I realized I was still screaming, so I shut up and started listening to my matrix. When I'd sent my matrix into being a few days ago, I started with just a tiny patch of new spheres. It had taken a few minutes to get in touch with the sight, taste, and smell, or the sound, taste, and smell of the new matrix. Fortunately, that wasn't the case anymore. My new body was full of the new configuration, and I immediately got in touch with the low notes of the cello, the taste of the boiled potatoes, and the feel and smell of rubber. Penny pushed out the last mini arrow, and I sang. I sang the song of completion, and my matrix snapped back together. All the little free-floating magic capsules in my ankle combined back into spheres and then clicked back into place. The disruption from the mini arrows were fixed even faster. I stood up, blinked my eyes, and stepped back into my pigeon stance again. I pigeon stepped to test. My ankle wasn't perfect, but it worked well enough. Considering I just had an arrow sticking out of my foot a few minutes ago, I thought I was doing pretty freaking good. I felt for my alley cat, my moonlit night, my witness. I realized the crowd was going insane. I'd gotten shot, and yet somehow I was back on my feet. They didn't bother me, though. The zen of the calm lake settled over me again. My metaphorical dance partner had stepped on my foot and stabbed me. I gave a mental shrug. Shit happens. I could see Eugene clearly now. My vision had cleared up already, and I guess he was getting over his flash too. He had tears streaming down his face, and he staggered a bit. You wouldn't think light could have such a powerful effect, but my flashers are just insane. Something that bright, shining that fast, can really mess with you. He shot another arrow, and it was a clumsy affair, which is why I was shocked and surprised when it bent in the air and came right at me. What the heck? It wasn't as fast as his other arrows, so a simple slap block knocked it away. Eugene roared in anger and shot again, then again and again. He was furious and frustrated, and his every move said he just wanted me to die already. The crazy part was that every shot was on target. Every single one streaked right toward my chest. I knew he couldn't see well, as his eyes were still streaming with tears. So how the heck was he targeting me? I loved all the arrows he was shooting, though. They were just wasted magic. The plan was working. I was feeling loose and doing well until he shot a flaming arrow at me. I didn't even really have time to think about reacting differently, and I'm not sure what I would have done differently even if I would have had the time. I slap blocked it just like the others, and it just sort of vanished. When I blocked his regular arrows, they usually kept their shape and flew right by. This flaming arrow, though, just fell apart. The flames winked out and nothing happened. Eugene didn't stop shooting either. He kept peppering me with more arrows. He'd stopped staggering and his eyes looked a bit better. They were still watering a lot, though, so there was no way he could see well. I noticed it was getting hot, but I figured it was just a side effect of the flame arrow. Flames do equal heat after all. Damn, it was getting really hot in here. One flaming arrow couldn't have generated that much heat, could it? Eugene was still shooting arrows, but now I felt like we were fighting in the Mojave Desert. It's a good thing I didn't need my eyes to see his shots, because sweat was pouring down my face. Something's wrong, my analytical side hollered. You're in some sort of heat field. Get the hell out of it. Shut him down, I yelled to my little creations, and they swooped in. My flashers went off, but his arrows kept coming. Eugene had also figured out how to fight without his eyesight. 4 belchers went off at once, and Eugene staggered back. Sound can be very disorienting too. It was my basher that saved me this time. Every time Eugene got ready to shoot, he triggered Eugene's shield charm and shut him down. That was the problem with shield charms. They stopped attacks from reaching the mage, but they also kept the mage's magic from getting out. I also noticed one other thing that was awesome for me. Apparently the shield only extended a certain distance from the mage it was protecting. Eugene's bow was too big to fit inside, so every time my basher triggered his shield charm, it cut the ends off his bow. He just regrew it back again, of course, but still, it was a nice disruption. I would have loved to have seen more of it, but I had my own problem to deal with. I rolled to the side, but when I came up, the air was still way too hot. I sprinted a short distance, figuring I just needed to get away from the heat zone, but it still felt like I was inside an oven. Fill the spell, my analytical side suggested. To have an effect this powerful, it has to be big and active. I had been so focused on his arrows, I hadn't been aware of anything else. Once I shifted my attention, the spell came into focus. The damn thing had surrounded me. It was like I was the marshmallow man and it was trying to toast me for s'mores. The temperature went up several degrees, and now it was hard to breathe. I had to figure this out. I had to figure it out fast. I staggered away, and the heat spell moved with me. How the hell was that happening? It was glued to me somehow. How did I get it off me? Tracker, my analytical side said triumphantly. You have a tracker. Get out of your clothes now. The temperature went up again. I couldn't think. It felt like I was boiling. I was just about to collapse when the mark of the deep earth kicked in. It liked the heat. It welcomed the toasty side. It was lava incarnate. It looked at that heat spell and said, "Bring it, bitch." Lava capsules of magic flooded my system, and suddenly I could breathe again. I still felt like I was baking in an oven, but now I could move. I ripped off my clothes like they were on fire, which, in a sense, they were. I threw NL's beautiful clothes away from me, and the heat spell followed them. Get rid of your shoes and underwear too, my analytical side said quickly. Underwear? I didn't mind losing my shoes, but I wasn't sure I wanted to be naked in front of thousands and thousands of people. You do realize that a new tracker can't sit on your skin because of your aura, right? My analytical side said in his best British lecturing tone, which means he's going to try and put another tracker on your clothes. If your only clothes are your underwear, then that means all those lovely speeding arrows are going to track right towards your crotch. He gave me the hairy eyeball. Is that what you want? Is your Louisville slugger ready to bat away Robin Hood and all his merry men? Oh, I see what you mean, I replied, and quickly kicked off my underwear. Besides, your clothes never seem to survive your battles anyway, he said. Just think of it as free advertising. Your popsicle brings all the boys to the yard and they're like, if we'd had enough time, I'd have done the whole milkshake song with them. But my clothes started smoldering and I got the hell away from them as fast as I could. Meanwhile, Eugene hadn't been idle either. He'd figured out I was using his shield charm against him, so he ripped it off and threw it away. Then he summoned his own personal shield. Well, crap. That meant my bashers weren't going to be able to work anymore. Sorry guys, I told them. Just stick around and bash his personal shield. Maybe it will distract him a bit. I got further bad news when the shield over his head turned darker. Looks like he'd put on some magical shades to help with my flashers. It works both ways though, my analytical side noted. A darker shield means he can't see as well for his shots. Now you've gotten rid of his tracker, he's going to have to go back to shooting you by sight. Good thinking, I told him. Okay, new plan, I said to my flashers. Stay bright and stay in front of him. Force him to keep his face shield as dark as possible. Don't go too bright though. Save some magic so you can shine for a while. We're on it, they said happily and got to work. They lit him up and his face shield went almost fully black. There was no way he could see well out of that thing now. Eugene shot a few more arrows, but they missed by a wide margin, and I didn't have to block any of them. He was lost without his tracker. I guess he figured the same thing as he started shooting his splinter arrows again. Surfers, you're up, I called. Do whatever you can, but stop any arrows from landing on me. I couldn't shut Eugene down anymore, so my dudes were my last line of defense. I also changed my physical defense. Instead of trying to block, I focused on getting the hell out of the way. As I dove, rolled, sprinted, jumped, and did whatever I could to stay out of his attack radius. The flashers kept his visibility down, so he was almost shooting blind. He was shooting fast though, and his splinter arrows covered a wide range, so staying away wasn't that easy. Fortunately, my surfer dudes were up to the task. They darted from splinter to splinter and mostly kept them off of me. A few still got through though, and when they hit me, Eugene immediately focused on where I was. He must have some sort of link with all his arrows, not just the tracker ones. Or maybe every arrow was a tracker. Either way, I didn't want to get hit. Penny was all over the many arrows that landed. She pushed them out immediately, so Eugene didn't have a second to target me. The mark of the Lagarelle followed her up with its cool, soothing touch, and between them, I stayed out on my feet and out of Eugene's crosshairs. I could have done this all day, but Eugene switched up his attack style again. This time he took a lot longer making his splinter arrows, but when he released it, it split into at least 100 tiny arrows. That was way more than my surfers could handle. The arrows all showered down over a much wider area. He could cover almost a whole wall with one shot. Arrows that tiny didn't hurt me, but they could find me, and when he did, he summoned an extra powerful speed arrow for his next shot. I was already moving fast, so it just grazed my shoulder. It burned like crazy, but it didn't stick, and I quickly sang my matrix back into shape. The next several minutes were a game of cat and mouse. He shot his secret arrows, waiting for the inevitable hit, and then tried to pin me down with his fastest, most powerful arrows he could summon. If I was a normal mage, it would have worked. I'd have gotten tired, slowed down, and gotten skewered. I wasn't a normal mage, though. T had healed me to the peak of perfection, and I could go full speed all day. I didn't slow down. If anything, I got even faster. I wasn't standing still on the strategy front either. I summoned my lead surfer to me, kept filling him up with my magic, and had him duplicate like crazy. It was a lot to handle, dodging, singing my matrix whole again from the many hits, and duplicating my surfers, but I made it happen. Soon I had 100 surfers of my own, and his seeker arrows became a lot less effective. It took a lot of my magical capacity to make that many, but it was worth it. What got me next was just plain bad luck. I slipped and fell. I'd sweat a lot because of the heat arrow, and some of that had splattered on the floor. I had bare feet now, so I didn't have the best traction. I was sprinting through that area when I hit a slick patch and went down. The ironic thing was, several of my surfers were ganging up on one of his power arrows to push it out of its projected path, and I fell so unexpectedly they ended up pushing it right into me. This wasn't a little shot through the foot. This was a full-on direct hit in the side. It entered my lower ribs, went through those organs you have in the middle of your body like intestines and liver, and poked out the other side. It hurt so bad I couldn't scream. I couldn't even breathe. My muscles locked up and I thought I was going to pass out. That could not happen. "Protect me," I cried desperately to my surfers. Since Eugene could feel his arrows, he had to know where I was and that he'd scored a solid hit. He was going to throw everything at me now. This was his chance to finish it. "We got this," Penny shouted as she flew to the center of the arrow and started cutting it in two. This arrow was thicker than the one that hit me in the ankle, and it was taking her a few seconds longer to get through it. The pain was so intense, I instinctively broadcast it down all of my connections. "It is heat. Accept it," the mark of the deep earth rumbled. "Die and regrow. It is natural," the mark of the Lagarelle whispered. "Stop that," Penny snapped, "and get ready." "Huh?" My furry companion woke up. "What?" "It is the way of the sword," Eggy rumbled distantly. "Now," Penny demanded, "pull it out." The butt end of the arrow was still sticking out of me, and I could get a good grip. I pulled it out, screaming the whole way. At least I could breathe again. I felt Bermuda frantically tugging at my attention, but I didn't have time for that right now. The other half of the arrow was still in me, and only a tiny bit of the tip was poking out. I slapped my hand over it so my gem cells had as much contact as possible. "Suck it out, Red," I commanded, and that is exactly what he did. My gauntlet lit up like a Christmas tree as it sucked all that energy, conducted it along its copper and silver network of vines, and expelled it as light. Penny pushed from inside me, and soon the second half of the arrow was out. While all this was going on, the surfer dudes had done an incredible job. Eugene had shot powerful, heavy arrows filled with magic in my direction, and my beach gang had forced everyone away from me. Even the arrows he personally directed had been pushed out of the way. They'd given everything they had to do this, though, and many of them had run out of magic and faded away. I still had half of them left, but I needed to recover quickly. I sang my matrix into completion, rolled to my feet, and staggered a few feet away. Eugene shot a few more arrows to where I used to be, and then he stopped. I kept quietly moving away as I gradually started feeling better. The mark of the Lagarelle was doing its cool minty thing, but this hit had been destructive enough that I was sure I was going to feel it for a long time yet. I knew I looked rough. I certainly felt rough. I was still standing, though, still moving. More importantly, I was still fighting. I waited on high alert, but Eugene did nothing. That wasn't a good strategy for him. The more time passed, the better I was feeling. Had the moment I'd hoped for finally arrived? Was his magic low enough that he'd stop shooting arrows? I pushed away the pain and summoned my alley cat mindset again. Eugene was my enemy. All these bastards here were my witnesses. I was here to destroy him. I leaned into the rage a bit more this time. I needed it. I started bouncing from foot to foot, getting my muscles loose again, getting my zen on. I just about made it too, when a primal scream shook the arena. It sounded like someone had stepped on a cat's tail times 1,000. I felt a fierce joy well up inside. I knew who that was. The primal scream sounded again, and the arena shook so hard people lost their footing. Eugene released his bow and crouched down. I'm sure he was wondering what the hell was going on. It was easy to see Bermuda's path through the crowd as people were getting the hell out of his way. He made a beeline straight for the stage and bounded up the steps. He clawed the wall of the ring and the whole thing shook. "I'm sorry, little one." The Grand Matron stepped up and reinforced the ring. "This is not your fight." He hissed at her and clawed the wall again. The Grand Matron stood firm and shook her head. Then he really tore into it, like he was trying to dig a hole. The Grand Matron slapped her hand on the wall and set her jaw. "I said no." I almost laughed. I could have told her that wouldn't work. If Bermuda wasn't intimidated by Mother Creation and Father Allrune, he sure wasn't going to back down for her. She was powerful, sure, but she wasn't cosmically powerful. Bermuda hissed at her again, then looked at me. I got the mental image to get ready. Do what? What was my crazy cat going to do now? Bermuda looked into my eyes, and I felt our magic connect. He crouched low, tail lashed, and then he jumped and landed in my throne room. I only had a moment to be surprised before he jumped again. This time he jumped out of my throne room and into the battle ring with me. I staggered back and Bermuda crouched down, recovering. Thank goodness Eugene wasn't shooting at that moment, as I felt drained. I just wanted to curl up on the floor and take a nap. I was blown away by what Bermuda had just done. Nothing like this had happened before. Oh, wait. That wasn't true. When Bermuda got hurt in the fight with Big Ugly, Penny had moved him from the sidewalk and into my throne room. When I'd gotten home, she'd moved him from the throne room to the bedroom, to the bathroom where we'd started picking out all the glass. With everything that had happened during the fight and being worried about overextending my magic, I'd completely forgotten that it happened. Apparently, Bermuda had a whole new skill. I wondered what the range of it was. Did we need to look at each other? How long could Bermuda stay in my throne room? Would he end up taking naps there? I suddenly had an image of my nice throne room covered in pillows, blankets, and cat toys. We would need to have a talk about boundaries. And he would probably listen to me just as much as he listened to the mother of all creation. Okay, enough about that. I could think about that later. For now, Bermuda was here and we had a fight to win. I looked over at the Grand Matron. Hopefully she wasn't pissed off. She wasn't. She just stepped back from the wall and stood with her arms folded. Instead of looking upset, she looked interested. She caught my eye and gave a subtle smile. I took that to mean that all was well and my companion was clear to be in this fight. Bermuda screamed at Eugene, then gave me the look. "Ready?" he said. "Am I ready?" I retorted sarcastically. "I've been ready this whole time. I've been ready while Eugene's been shooting arrows at me. I've been ready when he tried to burn me up with a fire. And I got ready when he shot me in the chest. So am I ready? You bet your furry ass I'm ready." He gave me a look like, "Humans, so excitable." Then he dashed across the mat to Eugene. The time for defense and wasting Eugene's magic was over. The attack had begun. As I ran across the mat, I realized Eugene had transformed his bow into a staff. Thank goodness for that. Trying to cross this distance with him shooting at me would have been insane. Goggles had said the real star of Eugene's melee game was his shield, not his staff work. I wasn't sure I agreed with that assessment. Bermuda was obviously a lot faster than I was, and Eugene was already defending against Bermuda's attacks. His staff work was fast and precise. Bermuda had rushed in, expecting to claw him a few times and call it done. Instead, Eugene had blocked him and tagged him with a glancing blow that sent him flying. Bermuda wasn't really hurt. He'd been jumping back already, but it stung his pride a little bit. He was fast. He was the king of the dot. How dare this enemy stop him so easily? "Easy, Tiger," I cautioned him. "This guy is good. We need to work on him together." I quickly sent him mental images, catching him up on everything that had happened so far. "He seems worthy," Bermuda summarized. "Oh, he's worthy, all right," I said wryly. "He's worthied all over my ass so far. I'm very much looking forward to handing some of that worthy right back to him. Now hold on a sec while I check him out." I slowed my headlong dash across the mat and started reaching out my magical senses, feeling out Eugene's defense. His staff was good, Not amazing, but good. It had a reasonable amount of detail, and he'd put a decent amount of magic into it. I sensed another sort of field around him, though, like a force field. His arrows had been all about magical damage. Was his staff capable of physical damage? Based on the way he'd knocked Bermuda out of the way, I had to assume so. Whatever he was doing to his staff, he was also doing to his body. His shield was set up in layers. One layer of magic, followed by one layer of force, followed by another layer of magic, etc. He had at least 10 layers of this, all tightly wrapped around him. The shield part of his head didn't seem to be any different, other than the magical layers were darker to block out my flashers. The final outer layer of his shield was magical, but extended for 8 feet around him, all around him, and it was very faint. If I hadn't been looking, I probably wouldn't have even seen it. His face shield's almost totally dark, and yet he'd been able to see exactly where Bermuda was and how he was attacking. I could only guess, but I figured this was his sensing layer. He was using his magical senses instead of sight to fight with. To test this, I walked right up to the edge of his sensing layer and stopped. He held his defensive position, like he hadn't seen me yet. I put one hand inside his field, and he immediately rotated to face me. I quickly imaged everything I'd figured out Bermuda, and together we came up with a simple plan. I'd attack from the front and take on his staff. Bermuda would attack from the back and take out his shield. If all went well, we'd meet in the juicy middle. Before we started, I needed to do something about his sensing field. I knew from experience just how much better feeling was compared to sight. If he could feel us, he'd know exactly what Bermuda was up to, and he'd be reacting that much faster. Flashers, back off for now, I told them. I need to let him have his sight back. They buzzed in acknowledgement and flew up over our heads in case I needed them again. Red, I need you and your hex network to suck all his sensing magic out of the air, I told him. Sure thing, he said cheerfully. We'll suck like a tornado in Kansas. We'll suck like a straw in soda. Come on, everybody, let's suck. I wanted to laugh, but I kept my game face on. Even Tyler would have been hard-pressed to be a more enthusiastic and cheerful sucker, and he was an incubus. You guys are the best, I replied back, and stepped into his sensing field. Immediately, my gem cell gauntlets started glowing faintly as they pulled in all that ambient energy and vented it as light. His magic wasn't replacing itself fast enough, so I got the idea of doing all the swirly kung fu hand motions. I had no idea what I was doing in a martial arts sense, but I was doing a great job of moving my gem cells through his sensing field and destroy it. I wanted to make sure to stay out of his reach of his staff, as I didn't want to get hit, but I added in some nice kung fu cries for flares. Whoa! As I stalked around him. Basically, I totally entertained myself and confused the hell out of him. He knew what real kung fu looked like, I'm sure, and this wasn't it. Best of all, I got what I needed, as he dropped his sensing field and lightened the layers on his face shield. Once I felt him abandon his sensing field entirely, I kicked my own magical senses up to full, stepped into my pigeon stance, and attacked. I hadn't realized how big Eugene was. Now I was trying to actually punch him. He certainly seemed a lot like Superman's brother. He was taller than me and heavier than me. If he connected, I was going to feel it. Plus he had a weapon, and he knew how to use it. Fortunately, he knew nothing about how to relax and tense on contact. His attacks were pure power, nothing more. My blocks and punches required more timing and attention, but when I did it right, I was able to generate a lot more force than my small frame suggested. I should have been scared, but I wasn't. Sparkles, my training dummy from the beach, was bigger and much more powerful than Eugene, and I was very familiar with fighting him. I knew this dance. I was freaking great at this dance, and now it was time to increase the tempo. Eugene might be the one with all the power, but I had a lot more speed. I started mixing some offense into my defense, and that's when Red and his team really went to work. My strategy was based on what I'd seen at the tournament when the Craftsman had his match. My gems were so much more detailed than his staff or his shield, so every time I blocked or attacked, it cost him more energy than it did me. Added to that was the powerful absorption ability my hex network had, and his energy expenditure was going through the roof. Just like the craftsman, I didn't try to attack his body. Instead, I attacked his weapon and his arms. Eugene had layered his thickest protection over his head and torso, but his shield layers on his arms were weak, and Red and the Hex Network were tearing them apart. I'd almost forgotten about Bermuda, but he made himself known in a big way. He made a flying leap onto Eugene's back, landed on his shield, and started clawing like crazy. My furry baby has the ability to tear apart magic, and Eugene's shield was no exception. Bermuda went through his layers like they were wrapping paper, and it was Christmas morning. Eugene's eyes became huge, and he screamed bloody murder. He looked totally shocked that his shield could fall apart that fast. He spun, throwing Bermuda off of him, and darted away. I let him go as I grabbed his staff and held on to it. All that magic he'd put into making it just went up in colored lights. Excellent job, I told Bermuda, and sent him a mental high five. He looked very satisfied with himself as we both gave Eugene a moment to put his shield and staff back together. This time his staff seemed a bit smaller and it didn't form as fast. The layers of his shield also seemed a bit thinner. My plan was working. Eugene was running out of magic. I attacked again, and Red really got into it this time. We tore apart the shield layers on his arms, and it wasn't long before I was pounding his forearms and hands. I tried this out with the centaur guard, and it worked now just like it had then. His grip got weak, and I tore the new staff out of his hands just as Bermuda attacked again. His claws unwrapped him even faster this time, and it was everything Eugene could do to get away. Eugene summoned his third staff, but his hands were trembling now. He also rebuilt his shield layers, but they were a shadow of their former glory. Bermuda hissed and sent emotions and images to me. This ring was the alley. The chandeliers were the moon in the sky. The crowd all around us were witnesses. Eugene was my enemy. There was no mercy. There was no revenge. We didn't hate him. He was our enemy. That was enough. We would destroy him. As one intention, we both stepped forward and began to stalk him. Eugene looked like he saw the shift in our energies. I certainly saw the fear in his eyes as he gave a battle cry and attacked. He was slowing down and getting tired. His movements were no longer crisp and forceful. He still had power, but it was becoming unfocused. I, on the other hand, was feeling even better. Penny pushed magic into my system, which made me feel like I'd just drunk a morning cup of coffee. Tea in his grove had been healing my hurts and aches, so every moment that passed got me closer to 100%. I felt the leaf green magic in my system, giving me resilience and a fresh spring to my step. I felt the lava magic in my system, giving me heat and power. I bared my fangs as I stepped forward to meet him with an attack of my own. I power blocked his forearm and felt his bones fracture. I grabbed his staff and ripped it away from him as Bermuda began his own attack. I pounded his shield from the front as Bermuda tore his way through from the back. Eugene's shield was an amazing thing, and in a normal fight, it would have been a lot harder to take him down. But Bermuda was pissed and ready to rumble. Eugene had messed with his human, and now he was going to pay the price. Bermuda had leaped onto his back and tore through several layers as he slid off. I ripped those layers off the front as he leaped again. This time he took out all but one of the remaining layers. Recognizing that Bermuda was the bigger threat, Eugene spun around and kicked Bermuda as hard as he could. Or at least he tried. A haze of red settled over my vision. My alley rage roared out of me unchecked. I had a flashback to Isabel kicking my little baby in the battle in the park. That was not going to happen again. Red tore through Eugene's last shield layer, and I let him have it. All the fear and frustration poured out of me in a primal scream as my fists flew like lightning. I punched him so hard and so fast, he shook like a rag doll. It looked like he'd stuck a fork in a light socket and was being electrocuted. Bermuda jumped on him again, and this time he hung on with his front claws as his back claws kicked for all they were worth. Blood, flesh, and magic flowed out. I felt things break and I didn't care. How dare he attack me and my companion? I ruled this jungle. This was my ring, my alley. Witness and beware. My enemy was still on his feet when I knocked him out. He got a vacant look on his face, and he slid bonelessly to the ground. He just sort of puddled there, and Bermuda was ready to pounce on him again when I snapped out of it. This wasn't my mortal enemy. This was Eugene. I didn't want him to die. I stopped and shook my head to clear it. I wasn't fighting in an alley. We were not under a moonlit night. The crowd wasn't perched on rooftops and garbage cans. Bermuda, stop, I told him. We've done enough. He hissed at Eugene and smacked him one more time. Then he paced over to me, sat down, and started grooming himself. I looked around. The walls were still up. The referee hadn't stopped the fight. Surely it was over, right? Call the match, I told the ref. He shook his head. This is a grudge match. The walls can't come down until he is near death. Seriously, I said, I'd won. Eugene wasn't going to suddenly get up and fight back. This should be over. The ref just nodded. You have to keep hitting him until he is in danger of death. Only then can I stop the fight. I noticed the Grand Matron was watching me closely. I gave her a quizzical look to see if she could help me, and she just shook her head. I looked down at Eugene. He was a mess. He'd recover, of course. I hadn't done anything really bad to him, like cut off his dick. But the healing he was going through would suck in a major way. Eugene was being used by Victor. He was the wrong guy in the wrong situation at the wrong time. In a twisted way, he was a victim too. I did not want to hurt him anymore. Suddenly I had a thought, and I walked over to the wall beside the Grand Matron. She couldn't come in the ring, but she could still hear me. How do you break an oath? I asked softly. There were recorders all around the base of the platform and up in the stands. I didn't really want them hearing our conversation if I could help it. She gave me a surprised look. I assume you're referring to an oath of obedience, she asked. I nodded. There are a few ways to do it, but the one that would apply here is that the teacher dies or gets too low of magic, then the student's oath is dissolved. Victor is going into a death match next, I said. So if he dies, then Eugene is a free man again? That is correct, she said. Then she gave me a piercing look. Are you really trying to figure out how to save your opponent, even after what he was going to do to you? Yes, I said simply. I haven't known him long, but he is a much better man than you've seen today, which is why I need to ask you a favor. Her eyebrows rose in surprise. I don't think she'd anticipated this. Ask and I shall consider it, she said. When his match is over, don't let Victor or any of his crew get their hands on Eugene. Instead, I need House Haytack to take him away and hide him until he recovers. I know you have a whole floor here for those in need of mental and physical healing. You can make sure he recovers fully and leaves here a different mage than he entered. She regarded me thoughtfully. We will have a talk after these matches are over. In exchange for this favor, you will answer my questions fully and truthfully to the best of your ability. Agreed? She was head over all the houses. If I couldn't talk to her, who could I talk to? Plus, I had a few questions of my own. Agreed, I said firmly. Then go finish your match, she said. I walked over to Eugene and put one hand over his mouth and pinched his nose shut with the other. The rules just said he needed to be near death, and this was a relatively painless way of making that happen. It took longer than I thought it would. In horror movies, the suffocating victim dies quickly. In real life, it takes a couple minutes, and they seem to pass so slowly. Even knocked out like he was, Eugene started twitching. It made me sick, but I held on, watching the referee the whole time. Oxygen deprivation wouldn't hurt Eugene long term. It was the only way I could think of to end this. It also gave me a moment to reflect on how this match would have ended if Eugene would have won. I'd be getting mutilated and stabbed right now. My balls felt goosebumps at the thought. Finally, the referee stepped into the ring and called it. Step away, he bellowed. The match is over. Thank you guys so much This has been so exciting. Obviously, we will get together again next week, and Sandy will have lots of good fighting to do. See you guys then.